Good Monday morning. This is Drew Wright with First Heritage Mortgage. My MLS ID number is 589370. Every morning we like to come to you, bring you information about mortgage financing and maybe a little bit of information about rates. Often we talk about products specifically or just things that we're experiencing or how we might see the real estate market. It's not always just specifically about a mortgage program or something. We hope you find this video today helpful. We try to keep these to something less than 10 minutes. Today, I'm going to talk about my recent experience of looking at real estate. You know, I'm always financing property for folks. It feels funny to have your shoe on the other foot, and that is to be looking at real estate. But that's what I recently did is I headed south to Florida, where I typically go for a few months, maybe back and forth to Kitty Hawk a little bit, as I do come have some planned trips back already this year. I'm in Florida and thought I'd look around. I bought a home here in Florida actually in 2004, so I don't consider myself an expert on the Florida market. I do consider myself knowledgeable. I'm in the Orlando area predominantly, in Lake County, which is the county adjacent to Orange County. I'm on a lake. I like to water ski. That's really the reason I'm here. Honestly, Florida is the epicenter of professional water skiing, if there is such a thing. It's really great to be here and ski with a lot of people like pro skiers that I get to ski with. Anyway, they're always much younger than me at this point in my career. It's a lot of fun. But I still work 5 days a week at least. Alex makes sure that, touching base with me, talking about files and things of that nature. But when Lisa and I get down here, we often find ourselves just looking at Zillow or looking at listings or seeing something that we see on the internet or YouTube, like you're watching possibly this minute, about real estate. And so I thought it was a really interesting comparison about looking at real estate here and comparing it here as to owning it on the Outer Banks. Because if I buy a property, another property, it is simply for investment reasons. It's to rent it, to cash flow it and see how it works, which is what we finance so much on the Outer Banks, so we can compare it with that. In fact, we think the Outer Banks is a pretty good market to compare it to, and if you can duplicate that somewhere else, well, that's nice, because you might have an affection for the area like I do here for Orlando for water skiing for some other reason, and can enjoy the recreational opportunities that area offers, where you can use the property maybe as much as 2-3 weeks or a month a year, and then rent it the rest of the time seasonally. You would think in Florida, it's sunny all the time, you could rent a lot too. So anyway, we recently came upon a property that really piqued our interest. It was on the Intercoastal Waterway. It was on a point of property that was absolutely spectacular. I'll be glad to share anybody the link if they want to email me for it. I didn't want to get out the address. The property's not sold yet, and I didn't want people to say I was thinking good or bad things about this property yet. It really has a spectacular view. It's a spectacular home. It's high-end luxury, a pool, and all these great things. It wasn't cheap. We thought, however, because it was being sold actually to one of these real estate auction type things. It wasn't a foreclosure sale. It's just a seller trying to sell through an auction company. And I talked to the auction company, and it didn't sound like there was a really distressed sale. They're just trying to move the property and get on with it. And I do think if you have a unique property, then maybe these type auction things do work pretty well. So anyway, it had been listed at one point for a crazy number, like $7.4 million. I looked it up, I looked up the tax value, that type of stuff. I'm thinking, the minimum bid was $2 million. I'm thinking, well, if it's an Outer Banks property like this, maybe if I'm lucky, I would think you get this kind of discount at Outer Banks, by the way. Maybe I can pick it up for $2, $2.5, or $3 million, and like Outer Banks property, I can have a rent return that's going to pay for the mortgage payment. It's not going to be a small mortgage payment, but you're paying a lot for it. And so I was comparing it against similar price properties or square footage of Outer Banks properties and thinking, if you did pay as much as $3 million for an Outer Banks property, you would hope that that property would generate $300 or $350 in rents. If it rents for $300,000, that's a so-called 10% rent cap. And so that's what I was looking for, is to see if I could get a rent cap that would help this thing cash flow. I wasn't interested if it only rented for $150,000, because that's half of 300. That's a 5% rent cap. So I talk about rent caps a little bit more in the actual email if you want to read it. but the goal was to make it cash flow. And so I went and looked at the property. I was actually blown away by the quality and and its view and that stuff, but I wasn't blown away by the location. It was really in an area that I think is interesting to talk about when you compare it to the Outer Banks, because we hear so often, well, I'm looking on the Outer Banks and whether I'm in Duck or Hatteras or even Corolla or even Pine Island, these homes were built 20 or 30 years ago, and people somewhat complain about the condition or the age of the house, and they're thinking it might need some work. Well, in this community, and this house was built in 2005 or 6, so it's not brand new either. In this community, though, the houses were actually built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And of course, we didn't have many houses built even in Duck, it's for sure, or Hatteras in those era. Our houses were predominantly built in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. So these houses are much older, and really they're not houses that you want to keep. These are almost all exclusively old Southern Shore style flat tops that are really just going to be torn down. But there's not as much redevelopment going on in comparison as you might say if you compared it to Southern Shores, which has predominantly lost their flat top homes. And so, one, it wasn't being redeveloped as fast as the Outer Banks. And two, it didn't really have anywhere remotely the ability to generate the type of rents that I was hoping it might generate. In fact, I think this is one of the points I wanted to make about comparing it to the Outer Banks is when you go to the Outer Banks and you start talking to property management companies, whether it's Twitty, Carolina Designs, Sun Realty, Midget Realty, or others, these people on the Outer Banks really understand the second home rental market and how to get the maximum out of these properties. When I talked to property managers here in Florida, one, they were hard to find. You couldn't Google and find one, which if you Google property management on the Outer Banks, you can find all these companies very easily. So it was obvious that there's just not that infrastructure of companies set up managing a lot of homes. Sun Realty, I think, manages well over 1,000 homes. I think Twitty, I think, is 400 to 600 homes. I couldn't find anybody that had that type of inventory or experience, and that was disappointing. Because it may be less want to bid on this property, which is coming up in next Monday. And then when I finally got to the people that could rent it, and they weren't long-term experienced people, they didn't have a lot of inventory, like I'm talking about numbers of properties that they manage. And honestly, they basically told me the rental season's essentially very much like the Outer Banks. It's 2 great months, it's 2 shoulder months, and then maybe some fill-in in there. So really the season's not longer because even though it is sunnier here all the time. So, I basically came to the conclusion, in fact, I came to the conclusion at best the property would rent for $180,000. That's not a lot of rents for a property you're paying, $2.5 or $3 million for. So I'm really not interested in it because it doesn't cash flow. But I think it's a comparison to say that it's really hard to find what we have here on the Outer Banks in other markets. The Carolina market is just really, really attractive. I'll leave you with one last thought. I'm going to get this quote here as I pull up my notes today of what I was going to say. There are some things I'd like to say specifically about cost, of owning these properties. In North Carolina, we hear a lot of complaint, of course, about insurance premiums. Well, insurance premiums in Florida were pretty similar. $20,000 for this property in oceanfront and say Wellhead Beach, which is what I was looking at comparing against, would be about the same amount of insurance. But the taxes were a lot higher. This property had taxes of $45,000, and in Corolla, based on the tax value, and I would almost say a $4 million oceanfront in Corolla, which is going to actually probably generate for at least $400,000 to $500,000 a year in rents, and I've seen them rent for close to $6 that are brand new construction, and that's what I was comparing it against. Those properties taxes are closer to $20,000 because the rate is 0.70 times 4 million would be a little bit under $28,000. So taxes are less in the Outer Banks and Dare County in general. Insurance costs actually about the same. Thought it was a pretty interesting analysis. My final comment though is that on this idea of rental property and comparing it to Outer Banks, was last conversation was with a property manager, and when I told him I was from the Outer Banks and I was trying to make some comparisons to that and see if he knew about the area, because a lot of people obviously know about the Outer Banks, the first thing he says is, I go there every year and go fishing, and he just talked about how much he loved the area, and obviously he rented a house every year and all that, and it just honestly told you that the Outer Banks has so much to offer. He lives in Florida, a great fishing area, but he goes to the Outer Banks to fish every year, saying the fishing is better on the Outer Banks than it is in Florida. I don't know how people in Florida would feel about that, but that's how this gentleman felt about it, who lives in basically it is Fort Pierce, which is north of North Palm Beach by about an hour. I just thought it was interesting. So I do want to follow up on a few things that we've had in our videos recently before I end here, because I'm running this a little long. One, I want to thank Clark Twitty for inviting us to his studio. I watched our video last week, and if you didn't watch it, the video with Clark was really interesting and great information about rents and how buyers can expect to receive rents on rental property they might acquire on the Outer Banks, and especially this time of year as they're thinking about what rents they might get and when they might get them. But Clark invited us to his studio, and I didn't really say that in last week's video, and I couldn't be more appreciative and thankful for that opportunity. It was great to work with Clark on that. We also had some videos recently, and we talked to Clark about this and actually did some video for his group of property owners talking about equity and how you can't get to your equity and do cash out refinances and lose your rate and all that stuff. Can you get an equity line? And so this week I was working on some customers trying to find them an equity line, and I found a source for an equity line on a rental property that you can pretty much get all day long for up to $100,000. Now that's not a huge amount of money in today's world, but it's a lot of money still, no matter how you cut it. And I think that if you're looking for a home equity line of credit and you own a rental or investment property and you want to get a reasonably priced, no closing cost home equity line of credit, I found a solution that gives you up to $100,000. Hope you have a great week. Thanks for watching. I went over a little bit over 10 minutes, but I hope I gave you some good information. I do want to say something about rates. One last thing, I'll usually take some commentary about rates. Rates basically suck. They're terrible. They're going up. Nobody likes what's happening in regards to rates. If you're buying a house, lock your rate. If there's really no reason to float your rate. You can always refinance it later if you're closing the next 60 or 90 days. Rates are probably going to continue to go up. I suspect they're going to hit 7.5. We're at 7 1/8 on a primary residence this week. We still have some phenomenally well-priced second home products for both jumbo and conforming loan amounts that are at 7 or under, and they're on our rate sheet. There are 7-1 ARMs and 10-1 ARMs. I honestly don't think any lender in America offers a better second home, especially for the conforming loan amount, than these ARMs without charging you multiple points because of the Fannie Mae overlays that they sort of screwed up with second home pricing not that long ago. Again, thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great day.